Welcome to the World War II newspaper channel where we read the Chicago Tribune one day at a time, going through World War II as it happened through the eyes of those who lived it. If you enjoy content like this, please subscribe to this channel and click on the bell icon to get notifications when a new upload is going to premiere. And also, if you want to hear the actual newsmakers, go check out my other channel, the companion channel to this one, the World War II Old Time Radio channel. There we have vintage broadcasts, including newscasts, speeches, old movies, and music. And subscribe to that channel and click on the bell icon. Now for the newspaper. News as read from the Chicago Tribune for Tuesday, January 28, 1941. Henry Chop reporting. The weather today. The sun rose at 7:07 a.m. It set at 5 p.m. For Chicago and vicinity, partly cloudy today, tomorrow fair, not much change in temperature. Light to moderate northwesterly winds today, becoming southerly tomorrow. The low temperature 25 degrees, the high temperature 32. Today's headline, liner torpedoed and shelled. Miami, Florida, January 27th. The Empress of Australia reported in service recently as a troop transport. Radio tonight, it had been torpedoed and shelled off the West African coast, then suddenly became silent. Tropical Radio said the 21,833-ton vessel, which brought the King and Queen of Great Britain to this country 2 years ago, called for assistance at 9:38 p.m. Chicago time, saying it had been attacked 200 miles northwest of Dakar, French West Africa. The ship's operator, Tropical, said the vessel was down by the bow and had put lifeboats over the port side. Tropical intercepted a 9:53 p.m. message saying the ship was being shelled again. Tropical said the 590-foot ship tried to send out another message at 9:55 p.m., but the signals were unintelligible and cut off abruptly. At 9:36 p.m., Tropical said the liner called the station here on the 36-meter band. Tropical answered, but evidently couldn't get through to the ship. 2 minutes later, this message came in. SSS DEGFSB torpedoed. Now down by bow. All lifeboats over to port. Can't get on any other channel. 12 valves now off. About 200 miles from Dakar. Deck awash. The station explained SSS was code for a submarine attack. DE meant from, and GFSB were the call letters of the Empress of Australia. Valve, Tropical said, is an English term for radio tube. At 9:53, Tropical received this message, being shelled again. At 9:55, the Empress of Australia's transmitter, which had been acting poorly, made a few dashes as if getting ready to send again, then went silent. At one time, the Tropical operator thought he heard the word troops, but the reception was so irregular he couldn't be sure. The Empress of Australia before the war was in the passenger service of the Canadian Pacific Railway Company. When the war broke out, it was converted to a troop carrier. Last June, the Empress was reported with 6 other vessels awaiting a convoy at Freetown, Africa. Last October 3rd, it stopped to rescue the entire crew of the torpedoed Dutch liner Volendam in mid-Atlantic. The Empress had left Liverpool on that voyage along with the refugee ship City of Benares, later a torpedo victim, but had turned back for repairs to its mine protection belt. The Empress of Australia was built in Stettin, Germany for the Hamburg American Line and was turned over to Britain under the terms of the Versailles Treaty in 1921. The Empress first was placed in the Vancouver Far East service. It was damaged in the Japanese earthquake of 1923, but was held in Yokohama Harbor as a relief station. It was further damaged when fire swept the ravaged city a week later. In 1926, it was transferred to the transatlantic service from time to time was used as a cruise ship. The Empress of Australia was selected to bring the British King and Queen to America in May 1939 because a world upheaval was feared and the British government did not care to use the Repulse, a warship, as originally planned for the journey. The royal couple returned to England on another Canadian Pacific liner, the 42,348-ton Empress of Britain. The Empress of Britain was sunk last October with a loss of 45 men, while the British were attempting to tow it back to port after it had been badly damaged by German bombers in the Atlantic. The Empress of Australia in 1927 had carried the Prince of Wales, later King Edward VIII, and and now the Duke of Windsor on an amity trip to Canada. With them was Stanley Baldwin, then British Prime Minister. Actually, the beautiful ship was dedicated to royalty at the beginning. It had been designed by its German builders as a luxury yacht for the ex-German Kaiser. The Kaiser never sailed aboard it, however, because it was not finished while he was still ruler of Germany. New York, January 27th. A German submarine had sunk a ship carrying a large number of doses of new American flu vaccine en route to England, the American Medical Association News said today. The date given and the name of the ship were not given. The vaccine is being tried out in several American communities and was being sent to England to be tried out there. A threatened flu epidemic there offered an ideal testing ground, it was said. New York, January 27th. A 42-year-old British whaler, Hectoria, arrived today with 15 merchant marine officers who will man ships purchased recently by Great Britain. The 13,797-ton vessel slipped into the harbor in a blinding snowstorm. The whaler operated in Norwegian waters before the war and apparently had been converted into an oil tanker. Rome, January 27th. Count Galeazzo Ciano, foreign minister of Italy and Premier Mussolini's son-in-law, has gone to the African front to take command of a bomber squadron as lieutenant colonel of the Italian Royal Air Force, it was announced tonight. He fought through the Ethiopian War as a major in the Air Force. Although Ciano remains as foreign minister, observers said there were political implications in the move. Mussolini now will assume active direction of Italy's foreign affairs, it was understood. Important internal and external decisions were expected. Ciano has acted as Il Duce's trusted interpreter of foreign policy for 5 years, during which time the Axis with Germany was formed and the Spanish Civil War was fought. It was a period of initial triumphs and recent reverses. The Italian High Command reported that its troops in Libya have inflicted heavy losses on British armored vehicles in fighting east and south of the port of Derna, 95 miles west of Tobruk. Italian officials in Rome last night said they knew nothing of a London report quoting the Ankara radio as saying Marshal Rodolfo Graziani had been dismissed as the Italian African commander. Cairo, Egypt, January 27th. A precipitate retreat of Italians into Eritrea from their last post on the border with the Anglo-Egyptian Sudan, Hagar, was reported in military circles here tonight. The British were said to be in hot pursuit. Between 3 and 4 Italian battalions were reported to be cut off from the main Italian positions in Eritrea. British vanguards in Italian Eritrea were reported only a few miles from Agordat, an important station on the railroad eastward towards Asmara, the Eritrean capital, 70 miles beyond, and Massawa, Eritrea's only good port. The Italians threw up defense works hastily at Agordat, British military sources said. The British have pressed back the Italians about 80 miles since the recapture of Kassala in the Anglo-Egyptian Sudan, January 19th. Another British column in Eritrea was reported closing in on Barentu, about 38 miles southwest of Agordat. While the British East African campaign apparently was gaining momentum, another branch of General Sir Archibald P. Wavell's army was said to be strengthening its positions 2,000 miles away at Derna, the next Libyan port in the path of the major drive in North Africa. The Middle East Command communique said operations in the region of Derna were developing satisfactorily. The capture of Tobruk last week, British headquarters said 25,000 Italian prisoners were taken, and these, together with another 1,100 captured so far in the Eritrean invasion, raised Britain's total of fascist prisoners to about 111,000. The British Air Force, which has worked in unison with the land forces on both fronts, claimed 6 Italian planes yesterday in yesterday's fighting, 5 shot down in air battles and 1 destroyed on a landing field. 1 British fighter plane was lost. On a separate fighting front still farther down in Africa, the British reported they had penetrated Ethiopia in the Galabat and Metmema regions. They said British patrols in Italian Somaliland opposite the Kenya border had engaged in successful encounters along the whole front. The British reported Kenya colony practically was rid of Italians who invaded the northern part of that territory last fall. Some were reported to have been pursued into Ethiopia by South African forces, while others were said to have been pushed across the border into Italian Somaliland, where the British occupied waterholes vital in that desert territory. Athens, January 27th. Italian troops in central Albania tonight were retreating as a result of the collapse of fresh counterattacks. Advices from the front said the Greeks had smashed Italian thrusts and then had captured positions from which the fascists had launched offensives. A government spokesman said reinforced Italian infantrymen fighting north of Klissura, Albania, attacked with the aid of tanks, but were repulsed with heavy losses. Specific locations were not divulged. Retreating Italians were under constant fire of Greek artillery. Italian losses in dead and wounded last week were believed to have been the heaviest in any week of the war. Inhabitants of villages taken by the Greeks yesterday reported that a stream of trucks carrying wounded Italians had passed toward the rear in the last few days. Hundreds of dead were left behind, and great quantities of ammunition and equipment were abandoned. Greek and British planes have been bombing Valona, Adriatic port, and immediate goal of the Greeks, as well as Elbasan and Berat. Columns of Italian trucks have been attacked by the flyers. Bitold, Yugoslavia, January 27th. Fighting along the entire 100-mile Greek-Italian front in Albania was mounting in intensity, reports received at the Yugoslav border said tonight. Heaviest fighting was centered in the Tepelini and Klissura sectors, where the Italians pounded the Greek lines in mass attacks yesterday, with fresh units of Alpine troops taking part. Observers said the Italian infantry was supported by continuous artillery and air bombardment. The Greek forces stubbornly resisted the Italian thrust, the reports said, and this afternoon began their own counterattacks. The Greeks apparently were challenging their foe in the air, for a number of air fights were reported over the front. On the southern front, where the Greek left wing has an anchor on the coast, the Greek forces were reported to be near Ducati, 22 miles from the port of Valona. However, they were only 12 miles from the southern shore of Valona Bay. On the northern front, the Greeks were reported to have made a strong attack today between Malina and Handisti, claiming occupation of peaks of strategic importance. With the Greek army in Albania, January 27th, the appearance of German-type warplanes and a marked change in air tactics since the first of the year caused Greek officers today to speculate on whether Italian pilots are doing all the bombing against the Greeks on this front. I don't think those planes are being flown by Italians, said one commander. I never have seen Italian planes operated as these planes are being flown in the past few days. Those pilots take great risks. Ships resembling new Junkers types have been sweeping to within 200 feet of the ground to bomb and machine gun roads over which the Greek army has been advancing. London, January 27th. Hanover, vital railway and industrial center of northwestern Germany, today was reported to have been the target of an overnight British raid that started 2 large and several small fires as the British Air Force last night resumed its assault on the supply centers of the Nazi war machine. Operations of the Nazi Air Force over England continued at a minimum, with one lone wolf raider reported shot down and its crew of 4 interned at an East England town. London watched the 8th successive dusk merge into darkness without an air raid alarm, and only minor raids were reported in East Midlands and Eastern Scotland towns. Berlin, January 27th. The Nazi High Command announced today that British raiders killed 4 persons and injured 6 in western and central Germany Sunday night. Damage was said to have been slight. 2 direct hits on 1 British merchantman were reported in successful German attacks yesterday. Hong Kong, January 27th. The Chinese Central News Agency reported today that Chinese mobile artillery shelled and sank a Japanese troop ship on the Yangtze River near the border between Hunan and Hubei provinces January 21st, with the loss of the crew and a small contingent of troops aboard. New York, January 27th. An official British wireless report said today that Fernand de Brennan, the Vichy government's representative in Paris, had returned there after a short visit to Berlin. It is thought that de Brennan brought back with him Hitler's reply to Marshal Pétain's letter, which was sent a month ago, the report added. Vichy, France, January 27th. Marshal Philippe Pétain's already vast powers as personal leader of France were bulwarked tonight by a new decree of allegiance, which would enable him to prosecute and punish the misdeeds of ministers and other high officials of the last 10 years. The retroactive feature of the decree would empower the chief of state to deal with former premiers Edouard Daladier, Leon Blum, and Paul Reynaud, ex-ministers Pierre Cot, George Mandel, and others now facing war guilt trials by the Supreme Court. Following announcement of the decree, informed circles predicted expected cabinet changes soon. They said Minister of Justice Raphael Alibert would be replaced by Joseph Barthélemy of the University of Paris Law School, and forecast changes in the Ministry of Labor and Ministry of Youth and Education. The act will make persons and their property fully responsible for fulfilling their posts for the good of the state. The regime of irresponsibility is over, said an official commentary. The state appears now as a hierarchy with a chief at the head who commands and must be obeyed. Men who accept responsibility now stake their liberty, their goods, and their lives. Colonel François de la Roque, former commander of the fascist Croix de Feu organization, was released by German authorities at Paris today and crossed back into the unoccupied zone of France, it was reported here. Sources here said the rightist leader, who had been named a member of Pétain's advisory council, was arrested on January 24th and questioned about unauthorized meetings of his followers. Vichy, France, January 27th. A sword which George Washington gave to the Marquis de Lafayette will be turned over to Admiral William D. Leahy, United States Ambassador to France, for presentation to President Roosevelt, it was reported today. Berlin, January 28th. Adolf Hitler today ordered Germany's biggest and most populous province divided into the separate provinces of Upper and Lower Silesia, effective immediately. The order was designed to assure political leadership and administration for 7.5 million inhabitants, the announcement said. Katowice was made the capital for Upper and Breslau for Lower Silesia. 2 Nazi leaders were named governors, Fritz Bracht, 41 years old, for Upper, and Karl Henke, 37, for Lower Silesia. Paris, January 22nd, via Berlin delayed. The political discord, which in recent years has split the ranks of the Paris bar, was suddenly spotlighted today by the arrest of 12 prominent French lawyers on charges of being the authors of pro-British pamphlets. So seriously do the Germans regard the case that they have taken all documents connected with it out of the hands of the French examining magistrates and will carry on the investigation themselves. Traditionally composed of men from old bourgeois and Catholic families, the Paris bar has included a growing number of young leftists in the last few years. The conservative majority, however, still had no trouble in keeping control, and when reorganization of the state began, it demanded that all Jewish and foreign elements be weeded out of the legal body. Because of the strong sentiment of the bar for collaboration, the news of the arrest came as a sensation in the law courts. Among the lawyers arrested were Jean Odin, senator from the Gironde district, who was nabbed at Bordeaux, and Albert Naud, one of 12 secretaries of the Conference du Stage, a debating society of young lawyers in Paris. An associate of Leon Blum and Popular Front candidates for deputy is being sought in connection with the affair. The arrest of the lawyers came less than 2 months after the roundup of a student organization charged with printing and distributing communist literature. During one of the frequent police swoops, 4 youths were found passing out printed propaganda in the suburb of Drancy. They were said to have named the lawyers as the authors of the tracts. Bucharest, Romania, January 27th. Premier General Ion Antonescu formed a provisional military government for Romania today, eliminating from his cabinet all members of the Iron Guard, which was held responsible for the nation's short-lived but bloody revolt. All but 7 members of the new government are high-ranking army officers and close friends of Antonescu, who continues in the dual capacity of premier and foreign minister. In all, there are 11 generals, a lieutenant colonel, an air commander, 4 college professors, a Supreme Court judge, and 2 technical experts. As Antonescu reshaped his government, soldiers with bayonets fixed began halting every automobile passing through Bucharest in a redoubled search for any Iron Guard extremists who have escaped the government's dragnet. Official circles said Vice Premier Horia Sima, leader of the Iron Guard and accused of having led the revolt, is under arrest. Observers here believe the military regime would be retained only as long as Antonescu considers a national emergency exists. After the rebel leaders are corralled and court-martialed and a new political organization is formed, it was considered likely Antonescu would organize some form of coalition government in an attempt to achieve national unity. Just outside Antonescu's office, a funeral was held in the bullet-scarred public square for 17 army men who were killed in quelling last week's revolt. Thousands stood with bared heads at the mass funeral as a blizzard raged. Helsingfors, Finland, January 27th. In response to a Soviet invitation, the Finnish government today sent a commission of 3 economic experts to Moscow to discuss a possible revision in the administration of the Petsamo nickel mines. The mines are the richest deposits of nickel in Europe. Here, 12 words were censored. The Finnish delegation also will discuss other questions. A Finnish statesman told the Tribune correspondent the negotiations were proceeding in a friendly manner. The Russians, according to German officials here, are understood to be getting 60% of the output of the mines from which workers of the International Nickel Company, the previous concession owners, fled during the Russian-Finnish War in 1939. Finland, therefore, is finding little advantage in being the possessor of one of the world's richest deposits of nickel ore. The Soviet government, Germany, and the British shareholders of the International Nickel Company all are interested in the future of the mines. German-Soviet economic relations recently have been marked by more and more economic concessions on the part of the German government toward Russia. After 5 months of negotiations, the Germans were obliged to accept Soviet terms concerning the repatriation of the German Balts and from the Baltic states to new homes in the former Polish corridor. Each Balt family is permitted to take furniture sufficient for 3 rooms and 1 article of value. This agreement forced them to leave behind much of their belongings. Baltic newspapers published pages of advertisements by Germans offering to sell their possessions. The Germans also had to accept an unsatisfactory agreement for the extensive real estate and industrial holdings formerly owned or controlled by the Germans, which were nationalized by the communist regime recently formed in these countries. This agreement was part of an extensive arrangement between Moscow and Berlin calling for the delivery of 2,500,000 tons of grain and an unspecified amount of cotton and other articles in exchange for machinery and other goods. Transportation difficulties, however, are slowing down deliveries. London, January 27th. Wendell Willkie plunged into his English fact-finding visit today after telling Britons at a press conference that he wanted to interview the heads of all the political parties and the leaders of the governments in exile here. He specifically mentioned General Charles de Gaulle, leader of the Free French movement. Leaders of the exiled governments of Czechoslovakia, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Norway also are here. Willkie announced that he plans to visit Ireland and to see Prime Minister Eamon de Valera. It was announced the linen industry would invite him to visit Northern Ireland too. He has no personal plans to visit continental countries, Willkie declared. After his press interview, which was elaborately staged by the Ministry of Information, Willkie called on Foreign Minister Anthony Eden, lunched with Prime Minister Winston Churchill, to whom he handed a personal note from President Roosevelt, talked with Minister of Labor Ernest Bevin about manpower problems, and inspected bomb damage in the City of London, the financial district. He will be received by King George, it was disclosed tonight, but the date of their meeting was not announced. Tomorrow, Willkie will visit bombed sites and St. Paul's Cathedral, see the Governor of the Bank of England, Montagu Norman, lunch with Clement Attlee and Arthur Greenwood, Labour leaders, and interview the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Sir Kingsley Wood, and probably the Minister of Home Security, Herbert Morrison. He also will talk with Cardinal Arthur Hensley of the Roman Catholic Church and dine with Lord Beaverbrook, Minister of Aircraft Production. He is expected to be the guest of Prime Minister Churchill probably over the weekend. Willkie's meeting today with Churchill was scheduled for an hour but lasted almost twice that long. Willkie said he discussed the international situation, the war, and the relations of Britain and America. His conference with Bevin was prolonged until Bevin almost missed a cabinet meeting. When he arrived at the Ministry of Information for the press interview, Willkie stepped into a reception such as is rarely seen here. Huge crowds jammed the courtyard. Girl typists gazed down on him from windows and balconies. 30 photographers stalked his every movement. Attendants had to force a pathway to where Sir Walter Monckton, Director General of the Ministry, waited to receive him. Later, he was joined by Alfred Duff Cooper, Minister of Information. Willkie refused to discuss the American domestic politics. Willkie assured questioners that he was here merely to get all the information I can by talking with officials and the man in the street. He added, I want to find out all I can about English methods of production so that I can make up my mind as to how far they can be coordinated with American production. I want to find out where your shortages are and whether we can make them up. Willkie said he wanted to visit the worst bombed provincial towns. He said he had met no one who is downhearted and drew a laugh when he described a short outing in the blackout last night as like walking through a cemetery. Asked if he thought the United States would come into the war, Willkie said, I can't speak on that. I have no connection with the American government in any way. Washington, D.C., January 27th. S. Clay Williams, chairman of the board of the R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company of Winston-Salem, North Carolina, is to be named the first American minister to Great Britain unless President Roosevelt makes a last-minute change, it was reported here today. Recently, R.J. Reynolds, 35 years old, heir to $25 million of the tobacco company founded by his father, the late R.J. Reynolds, testified before a Senate committee investigating campaign funds that he loaned the Democratic National Committee $275,000 to help elect President Roosevelt. Reynolds now is treasurer of the Democratic National Committee. Washington, D.C., January 27th. Viscount Halifax, member of the British War Cabinet and His Majesty's new ambassador to the United States yesterday, spent an active day on all fronts in behalf of Great Britain. On Capitol Hill in the early afternoon, he hurried through a round of courtesy calls on congressional leaders and officials, including Vice President Henry A. Wallace. Then he returned to the British Embassy for his first formal press conference, during which he urged his country's cause and again praised the courage and resolve of the English people. Besides the Vice President, he conferred briefly with Speaker of the House Sam Rayburn and Representatives John W. McCormick, Democrat, Massachusetts, and Joseph W. Martin, Republican, Massachusetts, majority and minority leaders, respectively. Lord Halifax, at his press conference, attempted to brush aside any implication that might have been read into Prime Minister Winston Churchill's statement that the British will not need American soldiers in 1941. Churchill's statement caused speculation as to whether or not an expeditionary force might not be needed from this country after 1941. The Prime Minister's words were very carefully chosen, said the ambassador. He spoke only of the times that we can foresee. No inference should be drawn beyond the bare words of his statement. A reporter brought up the subject of the Nye Wheeler resolution, and Halifax said, "So far as any secret treaties for territorial distribution are concerned, I can say that up to the time I left London about a week ago, there was no such treaty." The tall, angular Briton, who smiled frequently or chewed on the earpieces of his shell-rimmed glasses, seemed perfectly at ease as he faced a barrage of questions from newspapermen crowded into the embassy's grand ballroom. Asked why no statement regarding Britain's war aim has been forthcoming from his government, he replied tersely that Britain's first aim is to win the war. "If we fail to win, a statement of our aims would be academic," he said wryly. "Other powers would be putting their aims into effect. Our peace aim after the war is to join with other nations in reconstructing the world so there will never be another war." Discussing statements to the effect that democracy will never return to England after the war, Lord Halifax asserted that the British people would not be fighting as if they are if they did not think they were fighting for democracy. He said they are as fond of liberty as the people of the United States. "It is impossible to exaggerate the way the British are united," the envoy declared. "All parties are pulling together solidly as one team. The behavior of the people of London is beyond description. But it is up to you people here to form your own opinion how we are standing up and what we are standing up against, and then make up your own mind whether to aid us." The ambassador listed ships and aircraft as the greatest needs of his country at the present time. Tokyo, January 28th. The increasingly serious concern which is felt in all quarters over what is described as definite signs of Japanese and American relations becoming more strained following statements by President Roosevelt and Secretary of State Hull was reflected in an editorial today in the Tokyo Asahi. It said the two countries are heading for the point of ignition. Maintaining that this is the result of the challenging and offensive attitude of the United States, the editorial charged the United States with aiming to enforce an economic blockade of Japan by disturbing and deranging the sea zones of the East Asia Common Prosperity Sphere, as well as Japan's world trade routes. Asahi expressed alarm at the building of a submarine base at Guam. It said that American tactics will be to wage sea and air guerrilla action using Guam and the Philippines as bases, the newspaper continued. "The Guam Philippines line is near our country, and although we concede America is free to fortify the islands, its action seems to indicate it is desirous of making the Western and Southwestern Pacific its sphere of influence. This attitude is becoming less disguised, and it is necessary for Japan under such circumstances to counteract this and prepare against emergency with firm resolution." Asahi sharply criticized the United States for misunderstanding Japan's true aims and lauded Foreign Minister Yosuke Matsuoka's explanation on Sunday of his government's attitude toward the United States. Matsuoka attacked President Roosevelt and Secretary of State Hull as warmongers. He charged that by helping China, the United States was prolonging restoration of peace in Asia. He said there was nothing Japan could do but defend itself if America persists in regarding New Zealand and Australia and other regions of the Western Pacific as its first line of defense and thus menaces Japan's possession. The House of Representatives cheered last night when Premier Prince Fumimaro Konoe promised that he would remain as premier until the war with China was concluded. London, January 27th. A Reuters British news agency dispatched from Nairobi, Kenya colony said today that evidence at the inquest of the Earl of Errol, who was reported last week to have died after an automobile accident, suggested that he was murdered. A physician, Reuters said, testified that the 39-year-old Earl's death was caused by a revolver shot which entered the head behind the left ear and which could scarcely have been self-inflicted. The inquest was adjourned 2 weeks. The ancient title of Lord High Constable of Scotland, granted by Robert Bruce in 1314, fell to the Earl of Errol's 15-year-old daughter, Lady Diana Danesi Hay, when he died. The rank gives her precedence in Scotland above all peers or holders of other hereditary titles, except members of the royal family. London, January 27th. A plan to control the retail price of fish is being worked out by Britain's fishing industry and officials of the food ministry. It is understood a meeting of the Federation of British Port and Wholesale Fish Associations will be held soon to push the scheme. While the plan does not provide for rigid control of prices as in the meat trade, the fish industry hopes to impose its own price limits without compulsion. Dublin, Ireland, January 27th. 3 Irish soldiers were killed and a number of civilians injured today in explosions of 2 sea mines on the south coast. A sergeant and 2 privates were killed and 2 civilians injured by an explosion on the south Wexford coast. Before that, a mine exploded at the village of Ballycotton, County Cork, injuring several persons and wrecking several homes. Other mines were reported washed ashore from the English Channel. London, January 27th. David Greenfell, Secretary for Mines, warned Britons in a broadcast today of the possibility of acute local shortages of coal and urged them to share their fuel in a Help Your Neighbor plan. There may be districts so badly placed for supplies or so hampered by transport difficulties, he said, that we cannot avoid temporary shortages. He attributed the transportation priorities given to war necessities as the cause. Berlin, January 27th. German troops passing through Milan en route to southern Italy were reported today to have been heartily cheered yesterday by the Italian population. Rumors of an uprising in Milan and Turin were categorically denied, meanwhile, in German government quarters. It was stated that no German troops whatever are in Turin. German authorities profess to know nothing about troops other than Air Force detachments having gone to Italy. Asked what the reference to the passage of troops through Milan meant, they said, "It is natural that once the Air Force has been assigned to a certain task in a certain place, all sorts of reinforcements and replacements must be sent from time to time. No figures are available on the size of the forces sent to Italy." Rome spokesman denied there were riots in Milan and Turin or that German troops were used in police duty. Rome, January 27th. Ration cards further restricting the consumption of spaghetti emphasized an ever-tightening food control on the home front tonight while Italian armies fought with their backs to the wall in defense of fascism's empire. Beginning February 1st, ration tickets must be presented in restaurants for every dish of rice or such wheat-based foods as spaghetti and noodles, with the ration limited to 1 dish a day, either at noon or in the evening. The ration was fixed at 70 to 110 grams, or 2.5 to 3.85 ounces, depending on the category of the restaurant. Rome, January 27th. Pope Pius XII heard three musicians of the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra play Beethoven's Serenade in D major and other compositions in a private recital on Saturday. He complimented them on a flawless performance and gave each a silver medal. The Berlin Orchestra was here for two concerts last week. Havana, Cuba, January 27th. Reinaldo Sanchez Gomez, 21-year-old student, was sentenced to 6 months in jail today after his arrest at the request of Father Gutierrez Lanza, director of the observatory at Belen College. Father Lanza charged Gomez was a member of the Fifth Column operating in Cuba, and was devoting his time to propagating Nazi and fascist doctrines among the 2,000 students of the college. And now for national news. Washington, D.C., January 27th. In a copyrighted story, the Washington Times-Herald tonight reported that two former Germans, now naturalized American citizens, admitted today that they financed a mail advertising shop where thousands of confidential national defense records filched from civil service files were copied for some mysterious future use. One man also admitted, according to the Times-Herald, that when a list of all Washington Navy Yard employees was submitted to them, he contacted a friend in New York who came from Germany 20 years ago to ask him if he wanted the list to promote the sale of toolboxes. Then he said he became disturbed and ordered the man who brought him the records to take them away. The admissions were contained in an interview by the Washington Times-Herald with Walter Camp and Werner Olbrock. The two men said they put up $3,000 to finance the Standard Business Service. This service, according to the Times-Herald, was operated by the late Linford J. Haynes, former chief of publications in the Department of Agriculture, and his son, Lawrence. The records were supplied by Harlan G. Crandall, 29, a civil service clerk, who strolled out with them day by day, it is charged. Crandall and young Haynes are under arrest, and this afternoon went before the District of Columbia grand jury. Camp and Orbach insisted they put their money in as a business proposition with the idea of photographing and reselling 300,000 registrations of motor and power boats on public file with the Department of Commerce. Next came confidential personnel files from the Civil Service Commission. Camp and Orbach said they refused to have anything to do with these, but didn't notify any government agency or official that the papers had been abstracted from the files. New York, January 27th. The America First Committee tonight announced formation of a chapter in New York City interventionist stronghold in an extension of its militant campaign to keep the United States out of war and build an impregnable defense for this nation. The committee asked New Yorkers to help defeat the war dictatorship bill now pending in Congress, both in advertisements to appear in newspapers here tomorrow morning and in a statement issued in connection with the opening of headquarters here. Washington, D.C., January 27th. The Senate today passed and sent to the White House a bill authorizing expenditure of $300 million for increased naval anti-aircraft protection. Other legislation calling for a $909 million naval construction program approved by the House last week was reported favorably by the Senate Naval Affairs Committee and scheduled for passage on Wednesday. Other legislative developments in the defense program included, number one, Representative Carl Vinson, Democrat Georgia, chairman of the House Naval Affairs Committee, announced he soon will introduce a bill providing for mediation of labor disputes involving naval contracts. He said the bill will create a new board patterned after the Railway Mediation Board. The bill will provide that during the emergency, no man may be forced to join a union to obtain employment on naval contracts. Number two, Representative Edward T. Taylor, Democrat, Colorado, chairman of the House Appropriations Committee, introduced a bill providing for expenditure of $175 million for clothing and equipment for the expanding Army. The measure has been approved by the Deficiency Appropriations Subcommittee and is expected to go before the House on Wednesday. Number three, President Roosevelt asked Congress for $65 million to permit the Maritime Commission to complete its 200 cargo ship building program. Although speeded through Congress in almost record time, the bill for additional anti-aircraft protection for the fleet will be of little immediate benefit to American warships, it was learned. Rear Admiral W.R. Furlong, chief of the Navy Bureau of Ordnance, told the senators that the program will apply to 161 older vessels and is expected to take 3 or 4 years to complete. This length of time is necessary, he insisted, because the majority of the battleships, cruisers, and aircraft carriers cannot be taken out of service at the present time for modernization of their defenses. Testifying at the same hearing, Rear Admiral S.M. Robinson, chief of the Bureau of Ships, revealed that the Navy has had complete opportunities to observe naval action in the Mediterranean and the bombing of British warships by the Nazis. He said the Navy expects to receive shortly a complete report on the severe attacks by German dive bombers on the British aircraft carrier Illustrious. The program covered in the bill is based largely on such observations and reports, it was indicated. Topside shields are to be added to protect gun and signal crews from bomb splinters, and special armor plate is to be used to resist bomb hits and near hits. The naval legislation approved by the committee and awaiting Senate action would authorize, number one, construction of 400 auxiliary craft at a cost of $400 million, including 190 minesweepers, 66 submarine chasers, 24 motor torpedo boats, and 120 miscellaneous craft not specifically determined. The Navy would build 280 of the most urgently needed vessels this year and have authority to build 120 in the future. Number two, spending of $315 million to provide shipyard facilities for building these ships, as well as vessels already authorized for the two ocean navy. Number three, expenditure of $194 million for expansion of ordnance and armor producing plants to keep the supply abreast of the needs of the vast ship construction program. New York, January 27th. Press dispatches from Bermuda tonight indicated the United States would be allowed to establish a naval base in Great Sound, a large body of deep water in the western end of the British colony. An Associated Press report stated it was learned authoritatively the base would be built in Great Sound instead of at St. David's Island as previously planned. Press cables from Bermuda, important convoy point and British Fleet headquarters, are subject to censorship. If the report is substantiated by formal action of the British colonial legislature, the Bermudians will show a reversal of their original attitude toward the location. Originally, the Americans asked facilities in Great Sound, which Army and Navy experts regarded as ideal, only to have them denied by the colonists. Ever since the Destroyers for Bases deal with Great Britain last summer, the Bermudians have been loath to grant land or water rights to the Americans in the Great Sound area because they feared a base built at that spot would ruin their tourist trade. In peacetime, Bermuda obtained 80% of her entire revenue from tourists. Denying the first choice of the Americans, the colonial legislature leased a semicircular cluster of islands, including St. David's in Castle Harbor at Bermuda's eastern extremity. Castle Harbor is somewhat isolated from the tourist haunts, but is an extremely shallow basin of water filled with treacherous coral shoals. Naval hydrographic charts show enough deep water in Great Sound to accommodate the entire United States Navy, but they also reveal Castle Harbor could not even take in the smallest fleet units. This correspondent, who recently made a trip to Bermuda, could not even cruise directly across Castle Harbor in a small launch with a draft of only 2 1/2 feet. Thus, the Americans faced a tremendous job of blasting and dredging out the coral reefs, carving out anchorages, and cutting a channel through. A few days ago, the Bermuda legislature showed its first signs of relenting when it agreed to lease Tucker's and Morgan's Islands lying in Great Sound to the Americans for a seaplane base. A dredging and filling project may convert these two islands, now separated only by a narrow channel, into one. United States naval experts have always regarded Great Sound as more sheltered and at the same time more accessible for seaplane operations than Castle Harbor. Judging from tonight's dispatches, the Bermudians are not making any concessions in connection with the big Army Air Base garrison area, powder magazines, and defense batteries. They are still to be constructed on St. David's and other islands in Castle Harbor. Location of the Army landing field on Longbird Island in Castle Harbor will require considerable leveling of the terrain and filling in of the shoal waters. Comparatively little fill would have been necessary on the Army's first choice of sites, the land off Riddles Bay in Great Sound. While the Bermudians have relaxed on naval facilities, it is believed they will remain adamant on keeping the American land defenses and Army airfield among the Castle Harbor Islands. The Bermuda Committee, in its report to the legislature last November 18th, rejected the request for land in the exclusive Riddles Bay section with the following words. It is clear that the character of the colony would be violently changed by the unsightly buildings, noise, bustle, restriction of movement in large areas, and extreme overcrowding, which would inevitably result from the adoption of the present proposals. In addition, the colony, in spite of its proximity to the United States, has so far retained in marked degree British characteristics plus local characteristics, and this has a particular attraction for American visitors who find in Bermuda their nearest foreign resort. Those characteristics would undoubtedly be submerged. The committee asserted the area in question was in the middle of the colony, and its lease to Uncle Sam would not only cut the tourist belt and American colony in half, but also would sever communications and dispossess 1,500 persons. Ammunition would be stored within a mile and a half of Hamilton, the colonial capital. Honolulu, territory of Hawaii, January 27th. The Navy today acquired, through federal court action, an additional 464 acres on Makapu Peninsula, Oahu Island, for its air base. This enlarged the base to 1,052 acres, more than 1.5 square miles. All homeowners in the area will be evicted. The Navy has agreed to stand reasonable expense connected with evictions. Former owners will be allowed to remain 3 months without charge, many Navy authorities announced, in an effort to alleviate the existing housing shortage. The housing shortage has resulted from expansion of the armed forces here and the influx of thousands of civilians from the mainland to work on many defense projects in the islands. San Francisco, California, January 27th. Captain Charles E. Rosendahl, senior member of a three-man special naval commission studying sites for non-rigid airships, said today construction of a $5 million base for lighter-than-air craft would probably get underway in the San Francisco Bay Area within several weeks. The commission, appointed by Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox, arrived in San Francisco today to survey 26 proposed sites. Captain Rosendahl said the commission forwarded recommendations for 2 other bases to Washington, D.C. One is in the Boston area and the other in the Norfolk Hatteras area on the East Coast. These 3 are all contemplated under this year's Naval Air Program. A bill is now being prepared for the appropriation of necessary funds for the bases and for 48 non-rigid dirigibles authorized but not appropriated for in the previous Congress. It would take 12 to 15 months to build a base of the type he has in mind, said Captain Rosendahl, the Navy's outstanding advocate of lighter-than-air ships. The blimps will be used solely on the inshore patrol, searching for submarines and mines, guarding shipping lanes and approaches to major harbors. The Navy is tentatively considering construction of the largest rigid dirigible ever built, capable of ferrying planes across any ocean. Kansas City, Missouri, January 27th. A huge naval reserve armory, its interior constructed to resemble that of a ship, was destroyed late today by fire believed caused by an overheated flue. Federal Bureau of Investigation men and members of the police detail assigned to investigate subversive activities, however, began an investigation while the flames still were roaring through the structure. Fort George Meade, Maryland, January 27th. Flames swept through the framework of a new cold storage plant being built at Fort Meade last night, damaging machinery and causing slight injury to several soldiers who aided firemen. Washington, D.C., January 27th. A new basic training plane has been delivered to the Army Air Corps by Fleet Wings Incorporated of Bristol, Pennsylvania for testing, the War Department announced today. It is the XBT-12. The engine is a single Pratt & Whitney producing 450 horsepower at 2,300 revolutions per minute. Canopied cockpits are provided for a student and instructor. Fort Ord, California, January 27th. A 53-year-old WPA worker who carried a stiletto hidden in a large cake of laundry soap was shot and seriously wounded by a Fort Ord sentry today. The soldier said the man was trying to break into a sealed boxcar in the fort. The victim, identified as John Lutz, lay semi-conscious tonight in the prison ward of the military hospital. Army doctors said he would recover from a wound in his breast. Army intelligence officers and Federal Bureau of Investigation agents waited to question him to learn why he should try to break into the car. It carried no munitions or arms, but was loaded with general supplies for this big West Coast Army base. Havana, Cuba, January 27th. A Cuban gunboat tonight was searching along the north coast of Santa Clara province for the wreckage of an American plane with 2 Miami flyers reported down at sea in San Nicolas Channel. They were said to be Dr. Eaton and Harrison Jr. Fishermen early today reported they had seen signals for help. The flyers were lost on their way to Miami after leaving Havana, where they participated in an aviation show. Washington, D.C., January 27th. The Army ordered today $15,914 worth of curled gray hair. It is not to cover bald heads, officials explained, but to stuff mattresses. The contract for 53,800 pounds of the hair was awarded to Bloxham and Company, Michigan City, Indiana. San Francisco, California, January 27th. The 1,200-ton steamship Kvitchek, under charter to the United States Army, flashed an SOS tonight saying she had struck rocks in the Inside Passage en route from Seattle to Alaska, Coast Guard headquarters here reported. The vessel requested immediate assistance and gave a position which would place her 300 miles northwest of Victoria, British Columbia. Owned by the Alaska Packers Corporation, the twin-screw vessel sailed from Seattle Saturday night. The Coast Guard said it had no information as to how many persons or what cargo was aboard. New York, January 27th. The 38th Annual Convention of the American Road Builders Association, stressing the slogan Roads for Defense, opened here this afternoon amid controversial statements on the propriety of promoting large public expenditures for pavements under the guise of national defense. The dominating opinion seemed to be that 1941 road building, normally a $2 billion a year industry, should not neglect peacetime requirements and preparations for war. Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia of New York, in an extemporaneous address of welcome, begged the road builders not to use national defense as a slogan to lobby for federal and state money to turn their concrete mixers. I'm not without sin in this respect, said the mayor, but the national defense label has been overworked in promoting improvements. You have other sound justifications for appropriations for highway construction. Our greatest problem in this country will come after peace has been restored to the world. Base your plea for funds on normal requirements of traffic. These remarks forced H.G. Sowers of the Ohio Highway Department, president of the American Road Builders Association, to digress from his prepared speech and following the mayor to the speaker's platform. His impromptu reply was that a continued development of motor transportation facilities is essential to reduce the accident toll and essential to the country's economics, regardless of national defense. Much of his prepared manuscript was devoted to highway building as a war measure. New Haven, Connecticut, January 27th. Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt told a Yale freshman forum tonight that the president could take over Mr. Ford tomorrow if an emergency existed. The remark, which brought applause, came during a question period following Mrs. Roosevelt's address, Youth's Duty Toward Democracy. Just prior to her answer, Mrs. Roosevelt had been asked what would happen if opposition to the defense program developed on the part of labor. Early in the current rearmament program, the Ford Company was temporarily at odds with the administration over building plane engines for Great Britain. Washington, D.C., January 27th. Federal expenditures for the current fiscal year passed $6 billion today. Although the figure of $6,034,999,222 reported by the Treasury today was less than half of the $202,370,970 budgeted for the year ending June 30th, it indicated the pace of spending was picking up rapidly after a slow start last summer. Defense accounted for $2,164,527,365 of the total and was nearly equal to the $2,844,033,352 deficit incurred since last July 1st. After making allowances for differences in bookkeeping in the 2 years, the spending figure was more than $1 billion in excess of the amount spent in the similar period of the preceding year. Albany, New York, January 27th. Governor Herbert H. Lehman tonight recommended to the legislature a $385,119,973 budget, which embodies economies consistently fought for by the Republicans. The governor's budget is $9 million below the figure of 1940-41. An outstanding feature of the governor's plan is his recommendation for abandonment of the emergency 1% tax on personal income, one of the many emergency tax measures that have been saddled on New Yorkers since 1932. If approved, it will be the first tax relief granted in a decade. New York State, the budget message stated, began the 1940-41 fiscal year with a deficit of $30 million. By next June 30th, it will have taken in $14 million more than it spent, leaving a cumulative deficit of $16 million. Revenues in the coming year, it is estimated, will top expenses by $37 million, wiping out the deficit and making up the $21 million to be lost by abandonment of the emergency income tax. The governor's budget cuts appropriations for state highways, state aid for county and town highways, and home relief. Jefferson City, Missouri, January 27th. A contest committee meeting originally scheduled to start recounting November's gubernatorial votes wound up tonight with nothing done except filing of another Republican protest, and that didn't even get into the records. A temporary Supreme Court order Saturday blocked the committee from opening the ballot boxes to recheck Republican Forrest C. Donnell's 3,613 vote edge over Democrat Lawrence McDaniel. The committee met anyway just to get that Supreme Court writ into our records, explained Senator L.N. Searcy, Democrat committee chairman. The 4 Republicans on the 10-member committee objected to any meeting at all and did not vote. The 6 Democratic members voted not to entertain the protest nor to record it in the committee's minutes. Washington, D.C., January 27th. The outbreak of colds in the Capitol found further victims in the White House this morning, compelling President Roosevelt and 3 members of his secretarial staff to quit work and go to bed. The president came to his desk in the executive offices as usual to keep his appointments, but soon complained of feeling achy and unwell. After the second appointment, he abruptly ordered the cancellation of the remaining 4 and returned to his rooms in the White House. Dr. Ross T. McIntyre, Surgeon General of the Navy and Mr. Roosevelt's personal physician, was called and advised the president to remain in bed the rest of the day. Members of the White House secretarial staff who developed colds and were forced to quit work were Stephen Early, White House press secretary, William D. Hassett, assistant to Early, and Miss Grace Tully, one of the president's personal secretaries. Los Angeles, California, January 27th. Garroted with a bathrobe cord looped twice around the neck, the nightgown-garbed body of Mrs. Marvel Bacchius, 47 years old, daughter of the late William Lanyon, millionaire Kansas industrialist, today was found sprawled on the bedroom floor of her home. Police arrested her estranged husband, Charles Rex Bacchius, 48, also known as W.R. Spivey, a Yale graduate. He denied any connection with the killing, but police asserted his fingerprints matched those found at the murder scene. According to relatives of the dead woman, Bacchius, who dissipated an $80,000 fortune left him by a stepfather, had threatened his wife on numerous occasions. The two were married 3 years ago and had separated 2 months ago. New devices for increasing the reliability of two-way radio telephone communication between airplanes and ground stations are being installed by United Airlines, according to an announcement yesterday. The devices consist of, number one, new 5,000-watt radio transmitters said to be the most powerful aeronautical ground station transmitters in the world. Number two, new combination receivers and transmitters for planes. Number three, a giant antenna for ground reception, which is said to eliminate almost entirely static and other interference. The announcement said one of the new ground transmitters is installed in Chicago and that others will be set up at key stations along the system. They will replace 400-watt transmitters previously used and will operate on 10 different frequencies. J.R. Cunningham, Superintendent of Communications for United Airlines, said signals of the new transmitter are so powerful they can be heard on the other side of the world and that planes will be able to hear ground stations under almost any weather condition. The new receiver and transmitter for planes weighs only 75 pounds and operates on 10 frequencies. It replaces a unit weighing 110 pounds, which operated on only 2 frequencies. In recent tests, pilots in a plane over Cheyenne, Wyoming, were able to talk to ground stations on the Atlantic and Pacific coasts simultaneously. The new antenna, strung between 4 poles 100 feet high, is 1,200 feet long. It is of quarter-inch steel wire, copper covered. Engineers say such an antenna installed in Tinley Park at 167th Street between Harlem and Cicero Avenues resulted in a greatly amplified signal coming in from planes. Cunningham also said that because plane-ground communication now would be more constant, this would make the recently announced automatic direction finder more consistent. The latter device makes it nearly impossible for a plane to become lost. Hollywood, California, January 27th. Errol Flynn and his wife Lily Damita are expecting the stork. Miss Damita told friends today the new arrival is to be in May. Movie actor Flynn in Honolulu was said by his Hollywood representative Johnny Myers to be planning to return to Hollywood in time for the birth. Flynn and Miss Damita were married 6 years ago. And now for local and regional news. An overwhelming protest against any move that might carry the United States into war has grown among the people during the last 2 weeks and has placed champions of the war dictatorship bill on the defensive. This belief was expressed yesterday by Hanford McNider, former Assistant Secretary of War and Minister to Canada under Republican administrations and past commander of the American Legion. McNider just returned from Washington, where he testified before the House Foreign Affairs Committee considering House Bill 1776 for abdication of congressional powers to President Roosevelt, said he believed administration champions of the bill are on the run. The idea on the Eastern Seaboard that it is treason to be for the United States and against war is disappearing among persons with whom I came in contact, McNider said. Meanwhile, organization of the Abraham Lincoln Unit of the America First Committee, with 1,000 Chicago colored persons as charter members, was announced by Miss Cornelia Howe, Secretary of the Chicago chapter of the America First Committee. Val J. Washington, colored leader, is chairman, and Mrs. Warren B. Douglas, 4051 South Michigan Avenue, is in charge of the Women's Division. The unit will open headquarters on the south side within the next few days, and an intensive campaign to enroll Chicago's 250,000 colored voters will be started. Curriculum of petitions protesting the war dictatorship bill will be started immediately, Washington said. Endorsement of the America First Committee's principles by the Chicago Associate Nurses Union Local number 21679 was announced yesterday by James Jenkins, chairman of the Labor Division of the Chicago chapter. This local is made up of more than 1,000 members. A delegation from the union will attend the chapter's labor rally Thursday night in uniform. More than 5,000 persons are expected to attend this rally at 8 p.m. in Carmen's Hall, 328 South Ashland Avenue. Federal induction of the 33rd Division Illinois National Guard has been postponed until March 5th because of new construction delays at Camp Forest near Tullahoma, Tennessee. The division will be sent there for training. Major General Samuel T. Lawton, Division Commander, was notified yesterday of the new induction date by the War Department. Delays at Camp Forest, formerly Camp PA, have twice forced postponement of the division's induction. General Lawton said, however, that he was told that the new date will not be changed again. He will confer on plans for the induction and training of his men tomorrow with Major General Leslie J. McNair, Chief of Plans and Training Division of the Army's General Headquarters in Washington, D.C. General McNider and his staff will arrive here early in the day. Later this week, General Lawton and several officers will go to Camp Forest on an inspection tour. Kankakee, Illinois, January 27th. Colonel A.E. English, son-in-law of the late Governor Len Small and an officer of the 33rd Division Illinois National Guard since 1917, announced today that he had resigned because of business and health. Colonel English served overseas as a captain. After the war, he became a lieutenant colonel and division finance officer. Later, he was promoted to colonel and was assigned as Chief of Staff G1. Colonel English announced he would accept another military task as a brigadier general in the Illinois Reserve Militia, which will function when the Illinois National Guard Division leaves for Camp Forest, Tennessee in March. Selection of the first 6 Army hostesses to be chosen in the 6th Corps area was announced yesterday by Brigadier General Charles H. Bonesteel, commander of the Corps area. The 6 women, three of whom are from the Chicago area, were picked from more than 2,000 applicants, General Bonesteel said. The hostesses, who will play important roles in the Army's plan to inject a home-like atmosphere into the lives of its enlisted men as an experiment in morale building, will be assigned to 2 different posts. 3 will go to Fort Sheridan on February 1st. The others will be assigned to Fort Custer near Battle Creek, Michigan on February 15th. Mrs. Ann Wellovich, 48 years old, of 5529 University Avenue, will go to Fort Sheridan as principal hostess at a salary of $2,100 annually. She will be in charge of all recreational facilities at the camp. Mrs. Wellovich served in France after the last World War, at one time as recreational director of a base hospital at Vichy. She was cited by Major General James G. Harbord for outstanding performance of duty. Miss Mildred Circle, 28 years old, a former Milwaukee school principal, will aid Mrs. Wellovich in planning a social program for Fort Sheridan soldiers. Mrs. Gertrude Altaher, 42, a home economics specialist, also of Milwaukee, will be in charge of the canteen to be established at Fort Sheridan to serve visiting relatives and friends of soldiers. They rank as hostesses and will receive $1,620 a year each. An Evanstonian, Miss Marion Phillips, 47 years old, of 1710 Asbury Avenue, was chosen as principal hostess for Fort Custer. A veteran YWCA worker, she directed entertainment for sailors at the Great Lakes Naval Training Station in 1917 and 1918, and later served as a YWCA secretary in France. She was graduated from Northwestern University in 1916. Ms. Phillips' assistants will be Miss Ruby G. Richardson, 41, of 4028 North Hermitage Avenue, Chicago, and Mrs. Pearl F. Dawson, age 41, of Janesville, Wisconsin. Miss Richardson, who will assist in recreational work, did Red Cross work in the World War. Mrs. Dawson, who will run the camp canteen for visitors, is the head matron at the Wisconsin School for the Blind. The six were chosen personally by General Bonesteel, assisted by Captain Roland R. Bach, assistant chaplain of the 6th Corps area. They were sworn in by Major Vern Sparks. Our object will be to make camp life as pleasant and as home-like as we can for our young soldiers, Mrs. Welovich said, speaking for all six. I think we can make the camp so attractive that we will be able to keep the boys out of mischief. Reminded that the Army's first announcement that it would employ hostesses to entertain enlisted men had met with a blistering attack from worried mothers, Mrs. Welovich said, I think many persons have been confused about the term hostess. As I see it, a hostess is a dignified and gracious woman who is always welcome where she is. Federal Judge William J. Campbell yesterday signed an order for the clerk of federal court to turn over to the Curtiss-Wright Corporation a check for $530,000 representing a payment on account for the Navy Department's acquisition of the Curtiss Reynolds Airport at Glenview, Illinois. The check has been on deposit with the court since last November when the government automatically acquired the title to the 319-acre airport with all improvements by filing its petition and depositing the money. The field is to be used for reserve training. Indianapolis, Indiana, January 27th. Norman M. Little, Assistant United States Attorney General in charge of the Land Division, told newsmen today he had stopped government acceptance of all titles to land being bought for the Madison, Indiana Army Ordnance Proving Ground because of what he termed exorbitant and unjustified real estate agents' commissions and abstractors' fees. The 60,000-acre proving ground site straddles Jefferson, Ripley, and Jennings counties in southeastern Indiana. Little said that under contracts with the Army Quartermaster Corps, Paul L. McCord, Indianapolis real estate man, has been collecting 6.5% commission for buying the land, and the Union Title Company of Indianapolis has been getting from $50 to $820 for each abstract of title. Real estate agents' unusual commissions in Midwest rural districts, Little said, is 2 or 3%, and that a random list of some of the Union Title Company's private transactions showed it had received an average of about $35 an abstract. American Bridge Company, Gary, Indiana, yesterday received from the War Department a contract to supply the Army with $117,687 of steel hangars. The department also announced that it had ordered $166,200 of pole-type trailers from Electric Wheel Company, Quincy, Illinois. The orders were included in a group totaling $7,312,928, let mostly to companies in states other than Illinois. Toledo Shipbuilding Company announced it had received a $1,129,000 contract for construction of a 200-foot cutter for the Coast Guard. Meantime, it was reported that officials of Toledo Ship and other yards on the Great Lakes will meet soon in Washington, D.C. to discuss contracts for numerous small naval vessels. The government contracted for $588,000 of Army housing at Houston, Texas, and $677,000 of housing for families of enlisted men in the Edgewood, Maryland arsenal. Kankakee, Illinois, January 27th. Organized labor stands to lose everything it has gained through years of struggle if the United States enters the European conflict, according to James Jenkins, Labor Division Chairman of the Chicago America First Committee. He addressed a rally here tonight in Kankakee High School auditorium. Jenkins, a member of the Bridge and Structural Iron Workers Union, Local Number 1 of Chicago, is a former member of the Legislative Board of the American Federation of Labor. He said labor is prepared to make all necessary sacrifices to arm the nation for defense, but assurances should be obtained that these sacrifices are for America and not for some foreign country. Asserting that the entry into war may leave America impoverished and exhausted with misery and desolation stalking the land, Jenkins exhorted organized labor to exert itself before it is too late and show its strength and courage in resisting efforts of the war-minded group. These people are leaving no stone unturned to whip the citizens into a state of confusion to put over a war program. Indianapolis, Indiana, January 27th. The contest of the election of Governor Henry F. Schricker, Democrat, which is expected to rock this politically minded state on its heels, got the final go signal tonight. Glenn R. Hillis, Kokomo Republican, who was nosed out by 3,963 votes, had remained aloof from the contest proceedings until tonight. He appeared before the Republican State Central Committee and declared frankly that he wants to see the alleged vote frauds threshed out without further delay and to be seated as governor if evidence shows him the winner. Hillis' statement had the effect of untying GOP purse strings on $30,000 remaining from the campaign fund. Some of this money will be used to carry on the preparation of evidence. The committee placed no limit on expenditures to be made by a subcommittee composed of James P. A. Fulton, Hartford City, Ralph F. Gates, Columbia City, and Mrs. Frances Mann of Indianapolis. Another result was the evident eagerness of the Legislative Contest Committee to start work immediately. Members of the state committee and legislators said Hillis' statement clarified the situation. George W. Henley of Bloomington, chairman of the House portion of the Joint Legislative Committee of 14, 10 Republicans, 4 Democrats, said the task will be tackled tomorrow. The contest petition was filed 2 weeks ago by former Judge Virgil E. Whitaker of Hammond, defeated Republican candidate for prosecutor of Lake County, who asked a recount with particular attention to the alien voters in Lake County. In the absence of precedent and on the basis of the wide powers conferred by the Constitution, the committee will have to formulate its own rules for the contest, Representative Henley said. The Cook County grand jury was reported yesterday to have voted true bills charging 2 tax consultants and 2 of their employees with conspiracy to submit false personal property tax schedules to County Assessor John S. Clark and also with conspiracy to submit false affidavits to the County Board of Tax Appeals. Those named were John P. Grace and George Holsby Jr., tax consultants at 77 West Washington Street, and John P. Daly, notary public, and Walter A. Westgate, solicitor for the firm. Bonds were set at $2,500 each. Harry Carroll, 23 years old, 2704 South Springfield Avenue, and Rudolph Stefan, age 54, of 2454 South Central Park Avenue, were turned over to McHenry County authorities at Woodstock by Chicago police yesterday in connection with 25 burglaries in the Woodstock area. The arrest followed the discovery by detectives George Fogarty and John Vasco of the stolen automobile detail that Carroll had bought 5 new automobiles within a year while not regularly employed. According to the police, Carroll, also known as Clarence Seamers, confessed to McHenry County thefts and 3 in Chicago. Stefan reputedly admitted selling the loot. Captain George P. Teeling, head of the auto detail, estimated the total loot at $25,000 in merchandise and $2,500 in cash. Walter J. Wendy, a city fireman, confessed yesterday he had disconnected the gas meter in his home at 2444 West 83rd Street to avoid paying for gas used for heat a short time before the home was demolished Friday night by an explosion. Wendy's confession was announced by Robert Wright, Assistant State's Attorney. Wendy was booked on a charge of petty larceny as a result of his confessed effort to cheat the gas company. He will be arraigned today in felony court. Wright was not certain whether other charges could be placed against the fireman. Wendy, a member of the Fire Rescue Squad 9, is 34 years old, married, and the father of a son, Walter Jr., 6 months old. He said he was unable to live on his pay and had placed a so-called jumper on his gas system so the gas would not pass through the meter to be recorded. Mrs. Alice Kirk of Madison, Wisconsin, former wife of an alimony row inmate who is to be taken to California to face a 16-year-old murder charge, told Judge Cornelius J. Harrington in circuit court yesterday that she feared her ex-husband, if released from jail, would kill her and her 2 sons. Mrs. Kirk came to Chicago to tell Judge Harrington what she knew of the life of her former husband, Harold Kirk, 45 years old. Kirk is in county jail, to which he was sentenced November 20th by Judge Harrington for failure to post $2,000 bond to guarantee that he would not leave the court's jurisdiction, and for being $7,000 in arrears on alimony. Through fingerprints, Kurt was identified recently as the Harry Kirk, wanted in San Bernardino, California, for the murder in 1924 of James Wynn, a taxicab driver. A deputy sheriff from California was in Springfield yesterday to obtain an extradition warrant and will arrive in Chicago today. After Mrs. Kirk had told Judge Harrington that she understood Kirk was wanted in Wisconsin for robbery, that he had committed bigamy but was never prosecuted, and that he had been arrested for bastardly and carrying concealed weapons, the judge told her to give a statement to Assistant State's Attorney Marshall Kearney. This man will not be released to California authorities unless they guarantee that, if he is acquitted of the murder charge, he will be returned to Illinois without expense to Mrs. Kirk or the state, Judge Harrington stated. If Kirk is released to California and then returned to Illinois, he will face a charge of abandoning his two sons, Robert 17 and Donald 15, who now live with their mother in Madison. Mrs. Kirk showed Judge Harrington a letter written by Kirk in 1931 and postmarked Los Angeles to refute Kirk's claim that he was never in California. She also said she received another letter from him written from California between September 1924 and April 1925. Mrs. Kirk told of her fear that Kirk might kill her after relating that he threatened last August to kill his son Robert unless she abandoned her complaint against him in circuit court. Kirk deserted her in February 1924, she said, and she did not see him again until April 1925. In 1929, she said, he was fined $200 in Chicago for carrying concealed weapons, and in 1930, he was sentenced to 6 months in the county jail for bastardy. In her divorce suit in 1932, she charged him with bigamy and won a decree. Mrs. Kirk also said she believed Kirk had robbed a filling station in Wisconsin in September 1924, and that he was still wanted on that charge. During their married life, he used many aliases, she said. Mrs. Kirk told the court that Kirk was living with another woman on the south side of Chicago shortly before his arrest last November. The son, Robert, was introduced to the woman, she said. Oak Park's commuting burglar, Jay Wolf, led policemen Robert Bickle and Lambert Barsama to his home in Rock Island yesterday and to numerous pawn shops in Rock Island and Davenport, Iowa. They recovered approximately $5,000 worth of fur coats, jewelry, silverware, and cameras, which Wolf has confessed stealing from Oak Park apartments in the last 6 months. The policemen returned with Wolf and the loot last night. Wolf, an ex-convict, 27 years old, told police he worked as a soda clerk all week, commuting to Oak Park on weekends by bus. With a screwdriver and a case knife for tools, he burglarized apartments in the afternoon and then went back home. One of the coats recovered belonged to Mrs. E. Libby, wife of the mail-order house executive. Wolf has served a term in the federal penitentiary in Leavenworth, Kansas for car theft. Omar Longton, 29 years old, who killed and raped his sweetheart Saturday in Bradley, a small town north of Kankakee, was revealed yesterday as a former parolee of the St. Charles School for Boys. Longton escaped from the state hospital at Kankakee on July 4, 1932. After his record of institutional commitments had been disclosed at an inquest held during the day, State's Attorney Joseph Tolson of Kankakee said that the case would be taken before the grand jury immediately. The coroner's jury ordered Longton held on a charge of murder. Longton confessed to the Kankakee authorities that he bludgeoned, knifed, and raped Miss Norma Altenbrun, 22, of Bradley, with whom he had been keeping company for several months. He said that he had feared he would lose her to a rival. According to the records, he was sent to the St. Charles School for Boys on December 23, 1927, after he had been arrested for stealing clothing from a summer camp near Kankakee. He was paroled the following September and dropped from the parole list in December 1928, when his mother advised the school authorities that he was to be sent to the state hospital. The records at the St. Charles School showed that he had been ordered from the carpenter shop by the foreman because it was feared that he did not have the mental ability to avoid danger. Tolson said that Longton joined the Army after his release from the school but was discharged a few months later because of his mental incapacity. In November 1929, he was committed to the state hospital. He escaped twice and was paroled twice. After his last escape, his mother informed the hospital that he was home and asked that he be considered on parole. Tolson said that Longton joined the Navy in 1935. A year later, he was sent to a hospital at San Diego, California for 3 months. The Kankakee Hospital authorities were not notified, Tolson said. Joseph Kostek, who was seized during a gun battle with police last August after he and 3 accomplices committed a theft in Cicero, pleaded guilty to a charge of robbery yesterday before Judge Julius H. Minor in the criminal court. A motion for probation was continued to February 3rd. Kostek's confederates still are being sought. The gang held up the Hurley Machine Company washing machine manufacturers at 2115 South 54th Avenue, Cicero, and fled with $1,406. Most of the money was recovered in the bandits' car after it was wrecked. Kostek is 23 years old and lived at 608 North Paulina Street. The Spitz pup, rescued from a floating ice cake in the Chicago River at Orleans Street last week, was given to Lynn Adams, 2 years old, yesterday. Lynn was especially happy that her parents, George and Betty Adams, 1871 Orchard Street, adopted the animal at its temporary home at the Anti-Cruelty Society because her own dog was run over by a truck last week. She said she'll call her new pet Patsy. The proposed ordinance for a milk inspection fee in Chicago, which would place a tax on all milk entering the city, received a setback yesterday. At the request of Alderman Joseph C. Ross, 40th Ward, the council returned the proposal to the Finance Committee for reconsideration. Action on the proposal will be delayed as a result of this move. I believe a measure as far-reaching as this should have further consideration by the Finance Committee, Ross said. Alderman Ross, as chairman of a special subcommittee, had prepared the proposal at the request of the Finance Committee. Springfield, Illinois, January 27th. After a conference with Governor Green, representatives of the Chicago Board of Education agreed tonight to drop their efforts to establish a permanent $52 million pegged levy for the Chicago schools. Instead, the $52 million figure will be asked for only 3 years, apparently in accordance with the governor's ideas. This was taken for granted in view of a paragraph in Green's statement reporting on the conference. Over the shouted protest of 2 aldermen, the city council yesterday voted to release immediately $9,822,000 of the $23,400,000 appropriated from the city's traction fund for subway construction and salaries and fees to subway and traction experts in 1941. At the same time, city payroll records made public yesterday disclosed that 2 brothers of aldermen in the council are employed on the staff of the Council Transportation Committee, that the widow of a former alderman has been paid more than $27,000 since his death as an investigator on the committee staff, and that a stenographer assigned to the transportation staff is working in an entirely different office. Salaries to these employees are to be paid from the Traction Fund. Chicago's 7,000 Chinese observed the beginning of the Year of the Serpent yesterday, the 4,578th new year since the Yellow Emperor Yongti began the oldest calendar system in the world. Children shot off firecrackers to frighten away the devils left over from last year. Elders celebrated the new year quietly and saved the cost of a more elaborate celebration in order to send more money to assist the nationalist government in the war with Japan. Gypsy Rose Lee, striptease artist, has decided to cast off something besides her clothes. This time it is her husband, Arnold R. Mizzi, a New York dental supply manufacturer to whom she was married in 1937. In a suit filed yesterday in Superior Court under the name of Mrs. Rose L. Mizzi, she asked for a divorce on a charge of cruelty. On November 6th and November 13th, 1938, Mizzi used obscene and abusive language, the suit alleges. The couple was married August 13th, 1937, in a water taxi 20 miles off the coast of Long Beach, California. Learning the ceremony was illegal, they went through another one on August 24th in Santa Ana, California. They separated November 13th, 1938. Miss Lee is appearing at a Chicago nightclub. And in sports, the University of Chicago will play half a dozen small colleges in football next fall while maintaining the informal type of game it played last year, it was learned last night. New features of the Chicago football program will include stricter adherence to regular football rules than was in force in the practice scrimmages played last fall, a prearranged schedule of a maximum of 6 games, possibly of a game away from home for the Maroons, and the playing of contests in Stagg Field on weekends. Last fall, scrimmages were held on weekdays to permit high school games to be played Saturdays and Sundays. Institutions which have been approached for games are Shurtleff College in Alton, Illinois, the University of Louisville, and Chicago area schools such as Wheaton College. In a statement to the Daily Maroon student newspaper, President Robert M. Hutchins issued a flat no when asked if the university intended to restore big-time competition in intercollegiate football. T. Nelson Metcalf, director of athletics of the university, also minimized the importance of the changes. The university will merely continue its policy of promoting athletics as an aid to education, he was quoted as saying. It was learned there will be no admission charge and no guarantee to visiting teams. Chicago's eligibility rules permitting any student, whether freshman, undergraduate, or graduate student, to play will have to be acceptable to its opponents. The Maroons will hold no spring practice and no preseason practice next fall. The Maroons' practice during the fall season will be held to the minimum necessary to keep the players in condition to compete in the games, probably an hour and a half or 2 or 3 days a week. Last fall, practice scrimmages in 11-man football were instituted for experienced football players when it was found that the 6-man football program was inadequate for them. The former varsity and freshman team members played 5 practice games, winning 2 against an informal team from Illinois Tech and 2 from Wilson Junior College, and losing to the American College of Physical Education. Some of the scrimmages, however, were played on an 80-yard field, 20 yards short of regulation length, and some with 12-minute quarters. This year's plans contemplate a return to a more strict adherence to the rules of regulation football. Lafayette, Indiana, January 27th. Purdue's basketball squad, still striving to bolster its defense, will swing into action for the first time in more than 2 weeks here tomorrow night as it meets the University of Detroit in the final non-conference game of the season. The game, the first of 4 successive home encounters for the Boilermakers, will provide a post-examination tune-up for the resumption of the Big Ten campaign against Indiana here Saturday night and Illinois here a week from tonight. In an effort to increase the defensive strength of the Big Ten title defenders, Coach Ward Lambert has indicated that Fred Crampy, rangy sophomore from Indianapolis, may step into one of the starting guard berths. Ann Arbor, Michigan, January 27th. Indiana's undefeated basketball team scored its 3rd straight Big Ten victory tonight, 41-37, but only after a furious battle against 5 Michigan players who refused to admit defeat until the full 40 minutes of play were up. The 5 Wolverines, playing without substitution, clung doggedly to the highly rated Hoosiers for 30 minutes. During that period, the lead changed 9 times. Midway through the second half, the Hoosiers led 29-27. The scoring honors were won by sophomore Jim Mandler, the Michigan center, whose 4 field goals and 4 free throws netted 12 points. The Wolverines fought back throughout the opening period. The lead changed 7 times and the score was 18-all with a minute to go. Indiana sharpshooters were missing the mark and their floor game was being tied up. Bob Droe and Johnny Logan scored goals just before the period ended to give Indiana the edge, 22-18 at halftime. Minneapolis, Minnesota, January 27th. Minnesota's basketball team needed an overtime period to defeat Dick Fisher and his Ohio State teammates 46-23 before 6,300 tonight. The Gophers took a 24-16 lead at the half, scored a basket to tie the count at 41 all after the Buckeyes had rallied in the second half and then won out in front to stay in the extra period. Fisher, Buckeye forward who doubles as a halfback in football, set a Big Ten season scoring record for one game by making 11 field goals and 2 free throws. The victory was Minnesota's first over Ohio State since 1937, and the second time in 3 years the teams have gone overtime. The Gophers piled up a 7-0 lead in the opening minutes and twice held a 10-point margin in the first half. A basket by Fisher just before the period ended cut their lead to 8 points. Minnesota settled down to protect its lead in the second half, but Fisher found the range again and led an assault that put Ohio out in front 41-39. With just a few minutes to go, Willie Warhol tied the score and neither team was able to regain the advantage. Warhol moved Minnesota back into the lead with a basket 10 seconds after the start of overtime, and Don Carlson brought the score to 45-41 on a shot from under the basket. Jack McLean scored for Ohio, but Don Smith added a free throw for the Gophers. And here are the Big Ten standings. Indiana has won 3, lost 0. Wisconsin won 5, lost 1. Illinois 3-1. Iowa 2-1. Ohio State 3-2. Minnesota 3-2. Purdue 1-2. Northwestern 1-4. Michigan 1-6, and Chicago 0-3. James J. Dykes, the White Sox manager, paused long enough in Chicago yesterday to indicate that he has been tampering with the blueprints of his 1941 baseball machine. Earlier in the winter, he had the mechanism to put together and thought it most satisfactory on paper, but he has made one alteration, reserving for himself, however, the privilege of changing his mind again. He now proposes not to start the season with rookie Don Callaway at second base as originally planned, but with Bill Knickerbocker, late of the Yankees, occupying the important defensive post. Outside this change, Dykes didn't have much to say except that he was on his way to the Pasadena, California training camp to have repairs made on the clubhouse porch rocking chair which he occupies while his boys are sweating on the practice field. Don't think I have given up on the Callaway plan, Dykes said while lunching with baseball writers in Comiskey Park. Callaway is a kid who has a long way to go before he's at his peak. Right now he might cover more ground than Knickerbocker, but wouldn't be as handy in the making of double plays, and we still have to find out whether he'll hit. I'll admit I'm taking much for granted in the Knickerbocker case, continued the Sox boss. He has been sitting around a lot the last 2 years, but I can't forget what I saw him do at second base for the Yankees when Joe Gordon was out with an injury. If he's still that good, and there's no reason he shouldn't be, he's my man. Besides, said Dykes in concluding on his revised scheme, there's no risk involved. By the time the season opens, I'll have a pretty fair idea of Knickerbocker's usefulness, and it won't be much of a job to switch to Callaway. Mr. Dykes isn't at all concerned about third base, which was occupied last season by Bob Kennedy, a freshman. There were times during the race when the manager, for one reason or another, wanted to bench his yearling, but his only alternative was Eric McNair. Dykes finally made the switch. McNair made 4 errors, and the next day Kennedy was back on third to stay. John Rigney, the Sox 15-game winner last season, heard from Uncle Sam yesterday. The River Forest pitching notable received his questionnaire covering his eligibility for 1 year of Army training. Rigney is number 440 on his draft board list. Despite Uncle Sam's willingness to fit him with a suit of olive drab, Rigney has made plans for an early start for the California camp. He will drive to Fort Worth, Texas next week to pick up Ted Lyons and Bill Dietrich, who will accompany him to California. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, January 27th. Jack Knott, right-handed pitcher recently obtained from the Chicago White Sox, and infielder R. Brancato returned their signed contracts yesterday to the Athletics. New York, January 27th. Babe Ruth was sent back to bed at home today by his physician, Dr. Robert H. McConnell. The babe has been down with a cold for the last week and got up a little too soon, according to the doctor. And that is sports, and that is the news as read from the Chicago Tribune. Henry Chop reporting for Tuesday, January 28th, 1941. Have a swell day.